in verse 37. So Genesis 41:37. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. Where are we right now? Joseph, at this point, is standing before Pharaoh. He's got a new look. He's got new clothes. He's got the same mission. He was making God known. He made God known in the house of Potiphar. He made God known in the prison. He made God known in the court of Pharaoh. Potiphar's house, that would be hard. I work in a corporate environment. Often they do not really care for mention of such things. So we can see where Joseph is at. This is quite the polytheistic environment that he is in. Egypt worships a plethora of gods. But then he goes into prison. And sometimes it seems even harder to try and take that kind of light into some place so dark. But now he's standing before Pharaoh. This is his chance to get out of prison. He's been in jail for 2 years, is what the word tells us at the beginning of 41. In verse 1, it says that it came to pass at the end of 2 full years. So at least 2 years he was in jail. Granted, he was running the jail. He was still ministering in jail. He had his own little prison study going on, his prison ministry. But he wants out. You remember when he interpreted the dreams for the baker and the butler. He said, to the butler, the cupbearer, in 3 days, you're out of here. You're going to be at the right hand of Pharaoh. You're going to be doing the exact same thing that you did before you ended up here. But to the baker, he's like, sorry, dude, but you're not going to be as fortunate as the other guy. And the butler, in his restoration, forgot about Joseph. Joseph's sitting there for 2 years. And we learned last week that a big part of the Christian life, a characteristic of everything that we do in our walk, we have a period of waiting sometimes. We really do. So the Pharaoh has a dream. The wise men can't interpret the dream. Then the butler says, I remember my faults this day. He's like, oh, Joseph, my bad. So Joseph is brought out of jail, put before Pharaoh with an opportunity to seize glory for himself to ensure he doesn't go back into jail. He doesn't do that. Instead, he just lets it pass through the hands of God. And he interprets the dream. He says you're going to have 7 good years. At the end of the 7 good years, you're going to have 7 years so bad, you're not even going to remember the 7 good years. That's pretty bad. That's a really rough 7 years. It makes sense, doesn't it? As time goes on, we get jaded, sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way. But typically when things are so bad, we really forget about the good things. We forget about the blessings that God has done, the things that God has done in our life, or even with just simple relationships. Things get so bad we completely miss and forget the good things that people have done. So he has an opportunity here. Pharaoh says, I hear you can interpret dreams. Instead of Joseph saying, absolutely, I'm the dream king. I can interpret any dream you put before me. Whatever you need, I got it. I got you covered. Let me hear it. I'll figure it out. He doesn't do that. He says all of that, it's not in me in any way, shape, or form. So he completely just kind of empties himself of that concept, and he says what instead? But God can. So now he's pointing Pharaoh to God. So that's where we're at now. So after he tells him, this is your dream. You've got 7 fat cows. You're going to have 7 good years. Then you're going to have 7 gaunt, skinny, ugly cows. And they're going to eat the 7 fat ones. So you're going to have 7 good years, 7 bad years. So he takes that wisdom and applies the knowledge. He tells him, he's like, you know what? You should set somebody up. Set somebody in your kingdom that's going to prepare you for what is coming. And Pharaoh liked the advice. And Pharaoh said to his servants, verse 38, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? What a difference that makes. Doesn't it? Out of all of his kingdom, Pharaoh recognizes how hard it is to find a man with the Spirit of God. Brings up a couple of interesting things for us, really, when you think about it. It's not supposed to be that hard anymore. Because now, at the promise of Christ, we have received the Helper, the Spirit of God. Each believer, when you choose Christ, each believer has the indwelling Spirit to continue making you, as the Word tells us, from glory to glory, turning your image into the image of Christ. You grow more into Jesus. That's one aspect of it. But you have to live for Christ. We have to take up our cross and follow him. Or a better way to put it, the way Tozer likes to put it, is we have to live that crucified life. Completely putting to death anything here and putting our minds on the things above. And that's what we've seen in Joseph this whole time, isn't it? People should really be recognizing that in us. In Joseph, it's not just shown by his words. It's shown in his character. It's shown in his action. So we get to see, really, that image of God in Joseph. And the Pharaoh recognizes it too. He's like, is there anybody else in all of Egypt that's like this guy? What made Joseph different than anybody else in all of the world? The Spirit of God. So then then Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. I love those passages. Just like with David. We have a lot of great stories about David. We have a lot of bad stories about David. But we see in the Word that it says that David was great because God was with David. So you have to understand how much that impacts us. We are completely different because of the Spirit of God. What really hinders the power and the effectiveness of the church is if we choose to live for God and let that light shine through, that men would glorify God. So verse 40, you shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. Kind of gives aspect to that passage in Proverbs, that the heart of the king is in the hand of God. This is a weird passage. He had a weird dream that no wise man, you have to remember, when they're raising up wise men, granted kings would often, like Babylon, Mesopotamia, Persia, they'd have wise men kind of built, they've been kind of taken from all over the empire. It's kind of where Egypt is at right now. But they also, if you remember, as we went through the book of Daniel 2 years ago. My goodness, time is flying. Along with the wise men and the Magi, it also says, and the Chaldeans. Just Babylonians. They had their own kind of hometown wise guys. None of these guys could figure it out, except for one Jewish dude who's in jail. An outcast who was a slave, who's in jail, charged with, essentially, sexual assault. What does the king do? He doesn't wait. Did you notice that? He doesn't wait. He's not questioning anything. Right away, he's putting this authority on to Joseph. He didn't wait to see if the dreams were going to come true. It's like, well, we'll see when the good years come. What would have happened if they just waited till year 4, year 5 of the good times before they really started kind of storing away for themselves? They would have really been in a hurting. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand, put it on Joseph's hand, and he clothed him in garments of fine linen, put a gold chain around his neck, and he had him ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried out before him, bow the knee. So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no man may lift his hand or foot in the land of Egypt. So we see Joseph taken to a place of the same authority as Pharaoh. Just kind of interesting. We'll continue to really finish the type, which you remember Joseph, being essentially kind of that type or that picture of Christ, is in jail with how many men? 2 men. Jesus going to the cross with how many other people? 2 guys. One truly did go down to death. One was restored as the Son was exalted next to the Father. So it's just kind of interesting as we see these patterns going through the Word. We've got an awesome one here in the next couple of verses. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name, I'm going to pronounce this, but it is completely wrong. If you look it up in the actual the breakdown of it, it is really weird. Zaphnath-Paneah, and he gave him as a wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. So Joseph gets married. Joseph gets married to a Gentile. We teach at Calvary Chapel that you should have a systematic Bible study or a systematic reading of the Word daily. This is why. We get to see patterns like a wheel, just a type, kind of going all the way through the Word. When we're having these issues or debate, I don't like to use the word debates. Biblical debates are kind of not a good idea. But a lot of people like to really debate, when is the church going to be raptured? When is the church going to be taken away? And there's three dominant schools of thought. There's pre, mid, or post-tribulation concept of the rapture. Some people believe, myself included, that the church will be removed before the tribulation, before the 7 years, that last week of Daniel. Others believe it's going to happen in the middle of the tribulation. Some believe it's going to happen at the end, based off of one or two kind of a supporting verse. And that's good. You should know the Word to know your supporting verses. But it's very important that you're taking in the whole counsel of the Word. It's just interesting as we see how much Joseph kind of looks like Jesus, as we've been discussing since we started with Joseph. Joseph takes his Gentile bride before the 7-year famine. So those of you that like running down those types of types, that's a good place to start. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So this brings Joseph 13 years since he left home, since he was sold into slavery by his brothers. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. Love Joseph. We do not see Joseph coasting on the coattails of a past success. We don't see Joseph just coasting on something that God has done. Joseph, as we've talked about, we're tested in two areas. We're tested in the good and the easy times. We're tested in the hard times and in the trials. Joseph at this point could have done what? He has the authority of Pharaoh. He can tell anybody to do anything he wants. He could have assigned somebody else to do it. He traveled. I don't know if you ever looked at a map. Egypt is pretty fair sized. He is traveling throughout all of the land. I want to point something else out too. Joseph learned this not in an easy time. You back all the way up to our introduction of Joseph. It talks about Joseph in his, probably a poor rendering, but his colorful robe, his colorful jacket. A lot of scholars and commentators believe that the rendering of that text really should read, it's longer sleeves and a longer robe, showing that you don't do the same kind of labor that everybody else is doing. In the introduction of Joseph, it doesn't talk, when it says, he's working alongside of his brothers, what's the rest of the text give us? Basically, he was inspecting his brothers. The second to the youngest son is inspecting all the other ones, and then reported on them. Probably not born into a place of hard work. This isn't something he learned during an easy time. Easy times make us really soft. It's hard times that make us harder. It's hard times that make us ready. Joseph learned how to do this in his hard time, and he carried it with him into something a little bit easier. Now in the 7 plentiful years, the ground brought forth abundantly. So he gathered up all the food of the 7 years, which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities. He laid up in every city the food of the fields which surrounded them. Joseph gathered very much grain, as the sand of the sea, until he stopped counting, for it was immeasurable. So Joseph is busy. Joseph is restored, and Joseph is getting busy. He's being slack in nothing. And to Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of the famine came, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. And the name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. It's not going to be the same way every time, but it is interesting to study the names. Manasseh and Ephraim, forgetful and fruitful. Man, how you grow and how you blossom when you stop hanging on to garbage from the past. It really holds us back. Things that have happened to us, things that other people have done to us. It's a weight. Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2 talks about us running the race, having endurance. And it's a separate study, and we'll probably end up getting into it because now it's on my heart. But we're going to do it right now. But it says to cut loose all that weight that slows us down. That makes sense. I've done races. I've done obstacle races. I am not a marathon runner. I'm not built for speed. But I'll do obstacles. And you don't want to carry a bunch of junk with you. In the military, we typically hike anywhere from 3.5 miles up to 25 miles in a training exercise like a McCree. You don't want to carry extra junk. It gets heavy after a minute. And we go to all sorts of places to try and cut that weight loose, don't we? We've got self-help books. We've got Dr. Phil. We've got Oprah. We've got Jimmy Joe Jim Bob down the road that has all of his best advice. Where we should be going is like the same place that Joseph has taken it. God has done it. It's a really hard thing to remove a root of bitterness. It's almost an impossible thing. The concept of forgiveness and grace and mercy. But God has brought him to that place to forget. And in his forgetting, he became fruitful. In essence, what's he saying? Get over it and count your blessings. When you're truly staring at the work that God has done in your life and you're counting those blessings, it's going to cause you to forget everything else. Then the 7 years of plenty, which were in the land of Egypt, ended. So the 7 good years are done. This brings Joseph to about 38 years old. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Then Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph, whatever he says you do. The famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine became severe in the land of Egypt. So all countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain because all the famine was severe in all the land. So we still see kind of that type of Christ. God, what do we do? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. The Word became flesh. I am the bread of life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Anybody wanted bread, they had to go to Joseph. It's also, we see it in Ephesians 1, Acts 4, Galatians chapter 3, that through Jesus, all the blessings of God are dispersed. Through Joseph, all the blessings of Pharaoh, all the blessings that were harvested from Egypt are dispersed. So now they are past the good times and they're rolling into the 7 bad years. We could do this. Chapter 42. Now we move into a very interesting chapter. Now we get to go back to dealing with the brothers. And I always like kind of dealing with the family of Jacob because they provide great contrasts and bring out great issues that we get to really look at, a contrast with the believers. In this chapter, we get to see the providence of God. We're going to point out 2 huge things. When we think about the providence of God, do you remember what that was when we opened up these chapters about Joseph? The providence of God is the wise and benevolent superintendence over all of God's creation. What does that mean for us personally? We get to see that in this chapter with these men. So when Jacob saw there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, why do you look at one another? So they have this famine, and it's so bad it's reaching up beyond Canaan. Jacob gets wind. Brothers get wind as well that there is grain in Egypt. And it's making the brothers look at each other. And in the original language, they're looking very questioningly at one another. Why are they worried about Egypt? Because they're relatively certain that that's where Joseph was going. The Ishmaelites and the Midianites that they sold their brother to, that was essentially their stop. They were going up from Syria down to Egypt. That's their trade route. Now they're looking very quizzical at each other. That would be super awkward. to bump into Joseph, whom you'd sold into slavery. Also, it's important to note that any time the family has gone into Egypt when they weren't supposed to, it got them in trouble. Abraham, twice, got him in trouble going into Egypt. So they have this kind of weird thing about Egypt, and he's asking them, why do you just look at one another? There's something to do. You're not doing it. You're standing around with this really dumb look on your face. And he said, indeed, I have heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down to that place and buy for us, that we may live and not die. So Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, lest some calamity befall him. Benjamin is the second and the only other son of the wife that he treasured most, Rachel. Joseph and Benjamin were full brothers. The context is kind of interesting. This shows us how we live without an understanding or a concept of a providential God. We see that he is living in constant fear. That really should sound familiar. These 2 years really bottle that one up pretty good, doesn't it? We live in a constant fear because we don't understand the concept or believe in a providential God. We don't understand that God is going to work all things out to its proper end. And it's also what happens when we believe the lie. That's what happened with Jacob. He believed the lie that his sons told him about Joseph. So believing the lie will put us in a place of fear. Not believing in a providential God puts us in a place of fear. A lot of us say, well, I'm not really afraid of anything. But when something happens we're not expecting, we don't like, how do we respond? We respond in anger, rooted in fear. So, congratulations, we've kind of lost on two fronts. So he is not going to send the youngest son. He's going to stay here with me. The rest of you, you go. Whatever happens to you, happens to you. That's, thanks, Dad, kind of a situation. So when the sons of Israel went to buy grain among those who journeyed, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was governor over the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to earth. If we had like a keyboard player through the whole thing, that's when that dark and ominous music would kind of come in. Like this is that shoes on the other foot kind of situation. Now Joseph is in charge, like in charge. His family, they're so deep in the land of Egypt, it's not even funny. They couldn't even run if they wanted to. And they're not going to recognize Joseph. Let me ask you something. What would you do? I've gone through this. It's just the way my mind works. I've played this situation now a million times in my head. There's a whole bunch of things. They can't say no. You're at the right hand of Pharaoh. I'd have played that one out for months. Now we get to see what Joseph's going to do. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he acted as a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them. Then he said to them, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." He spoke roughly or severe. Quite the concept. The brothers didn't recognize him. Interesting. At the first advent of Jesus, brothers didn't recognize him either. Why didn't the brothers recognize him? They were hairy and probably smelled a little bit funky. Joseph did not. Egyptians were not fans of body hair. And the question always comes up, well, they got that fancy goatee and all the sarcophagus. That's horsehair. Completely shaven. And they would use body makeup. Eyes, mouth, ears, and sometimes they would paste themselves up a little bit in something like a gold. So Joseph looked much differently. And you have to remember, so Joseph's around 37 to 40, 37 to 39. That many years have passed. So they're not recognizing Joseph. And we're also going to find out that Joseph is speaking through an interpreter to speak their language. So they're completely unaware, and he's speaking very severe. It gives us kind of the connotation that it's an interrogation. Why? If Joseph wanted them dead, all you would have to do is say the word. It's very likely that he would have to give justification. I killed these 10 Jewish guys. What for? They looked at me weird. You're the wisest man in all of Egypt. Who are we to question you? You're getting us through the famine. It's what it is. He doesn't do that. Joseph's plan is he's hoping to restore and he's hoping to reconcile. We really can see that God is moving in the life of Joseph. Forgiveness is very hard for us, isn't it? You'd even say, well, I forgive you. But what follows that statement? I don't have to like you. I forgive you, but I don't have to hang out with you. I don't have to look at you. I forgive you, but I don't have to be nice to you. Yes, I forgive you. Man, please keep your distance. Don't approach me. God has caused him to forget, and he has been fruitful. We can see that God really is working in the life of Joseph. Instead of trouncing his brothers, we see him with his interrogation process. What is it that he is trying to do? He's testing their sincerity, their jealousy, their sins, and their integrity. And really, when you look at it, the process that he's making them go through really is a smart one. So he's asking them, well, no, we haven't got that far yet. So we'll just keep going. So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Then Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed. Man, we only have really one interaction. Remember the book of Daniel in chapter 2. Daniel told the captain of the guard and the king, you give me a night, a day, I will give you interpretation of your dreams. So he went, grabbed his battle buddies, his prayer warriors, they hid in the prayer closet, they prayed. The next day, he realized he was given the interpretation and the dream in a dream in the night and responded to God. So we see kind of that interaction. We see Abram's and Joseph's very personal interaction with God. We don't have that in Joseph. What do we have? Joseph had 2 dreams when he was 17 years old. That's what he had to really hang his hat on. He didn't have to live in fear. He didn't have to scheme and connive and swindle like Jacob. Because it seems he understood the providence of God, that God really was. He had his hands kind of in the cookie jar of Joseph's life. And he remembers these 2 dreams. He remembers the first dream. You remember the first dream all those chapters ago. All of your sheaves, they stood upright, and then mine stood upright, and then your sheaves bowed down to mine. There's dream number 1. Lord, look at what you're doing. Here's dream number 1. All my brothers are bowing down to me. That first dream is coming true. It would have been really hard for me because I am a leaky vessel. I snickered. Told you so. You told me all those years ago you were going to stop my dreams. You're going to stop God's plans. And we see that man's planning and scheming and conniving, everything that we do will never trump the plans of God. Ever. But now Joseph has a problem. There's a second dream. First dream, the brothers were bowing down to his sheaf. Second dream included who else? Mom and Dad. Mom and Dad weren't there. So not only is he trying to essentially test the hearts and the character, and this, I guess the moral standing of his brothers, he also needs to find a way to get Mom, Dad, and Benjamin into Egypt. So we're going to see that process being worked out. Then Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed about them, and he said to them, you are spies and have come to see the nakedness of the land. That's a great accusation. Why? Everybody has nothing. He has everything. There's haves and have-nots. Have-nots have tried to take things from the haves. Haves tried to take things from the haves. Haves tried to take things from the have-nots. But they have everything, which means all of the land. It would make sense if they were going to send spies in, because we've seen that a couple times through the Word. Look at their defenses. Look at their guard. Look at their walls. Look at their chariots. Look at their horses. Look at their situation, hoping they're weak enough to take the land. Obviously, that's not their brother's intention, but where he is accusing them from does absolutely make sense. And they said to him, no, my lord, but your servants have come to buy food. We're all one man's sons. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies. That one probably would have made me chuckle too. But he said to them, no, you have come to see the nakedness of the land. And they said, your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And in fact, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more. But Joseph said to them, it is as I spoke to you, saying, you are spies. In this manner you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you and let him bring your brother, and you shall be kept in prison, that your words may be tested to see whether there is any truth in you, or else, by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies. So he put them all together in prison 3 days. We see him putting them in prison 3 days. We see Joseph going to be distancing himself. And Joseph said to them the third day, do this and live, for I fear God. That really should have been a dead giveaway. But it wasn't. Fear makes us forget. Not only does fear make us forget in a bad way, but fear also fogs all of the senses. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers be confined to your prison house, but you go and carry grain for the famine to your houses, of your houses. And bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified, and you shall not die. And they did so. Then they said to one another, we are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we did not hear. Therefore, this distress has come upon us. We start to see essentially, not in a full sense, but the confession of sin. We get to see the working of conviction. They rightly did put 2 and 2 together. They really are in that situation because of what they did to Joseph. They really have kind of put 2 and 2 together. And Reuben answered them, saying, did I not speak to you, saying, do not sin against the boy, and you would not listen? Therefore, behold, his blood is now required of us. But they did not know that Joseph understood them, for he spoke to them through an interpreter. And he turned himself away from them and wept. Man, the heart of Joseph. We really could take a page out of his book. I see my enemies suffering. It kind of lifts my spirits a little bit. Thank God. It's not a good thing. The word tells us not to revel in the failures of our enemies when their blood is shed. Because all you're essentially doing is watering that root of bitterness. And the important thing to really understand is it doesn't do anything to whom you hold the grudge against. It doesn't hurt them. It's a weight to us. And it bleeds out everywhere else. Joseph, seeing the level of conviction taking place, and like they're actually putting 2 and 2 together. And it's breaking Joseph's heart. So we get to see Joseph's heart to his brothers. Then he returned to them again, talked with them, and he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. Then Joseph gave a command to fill their sacks with grain, to restore every man's money to his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. Thus he did for them. So they loaded their donkeys with the grain and departed from there. But as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey feed at the encampment, he saw his money, and there it was in the mouth of his sack. So he said to his brothers, my money has been restored, and there it is in my sack. Then their hearts failed them, and they were afraid, saying to one another, what is this that God has done to us? So we see the level of conviction kind of expounding and growing. They're in the encampment. They've been accused of spies. Simeon's in jail. They paid for all the grain. They got the grain. Grain's loaded on their sack. They're still in the camp. One dude opens a sack, just one, not all of them. At that point in time, it's about, it's shakedown time. We want to see what else is going on. He opens up a sack and there's all his money. What does that make him look like? Not just a spy. It makes him look like a thief. He stole from the Pharaoh. Clever. Still stuck inside their encampment. So you can imagine, like, his level of fear is growing rapidly. Then they went to Jacob their father in the land of Canaan and told him all that had happened to them, saying, the man who is Lord of the land spoke roughly to us and took us for spies of the country. But we said to him, we are honest men, we are not spies, we are 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no more, and the youngest is with our father this day in the land of Canaan. Then the man, the Lord of the country, said to us, by this I will know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me, take food for the famine of your households, and be gone. And bring your youngest brother to me, so I know that you are not spies, but that you are honest men. I will grant your brother to you, and you may trade in the land. Then it happened, as they emptied their sacks, that surprisingly, each man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. Some of the brothers, They've got a couple of problems. First, they got to try and find a way to explain the extra money. Why? They're going to need more grain. Most commentators believe that this is taking place right about the second year of the famine. They're going to need more food. The famine is that bad. It's that bad they forgot the 7 good years. Problem was, that comes with explaining the extra money. When you got to go back and buy more food. Because problem number 2, Simeon's still there. They left one brother back. They left his 10, returned his 9. Not only do they have extra money, they might look like thieves. Simeon is still back there, and they got to find a way to get Benjamin out from the grasp of Jacob down to Egypt so that they would release Simeon. And now that they all finally open their sacks, everybody's money is still in their sack. Now they are extra doubly paranoid. And Jacob their father said to them, "You have bereaved me. Joseph is no more. Simeon is no more, and you want to take Benjamin. All these things are against me." If you fail to recognize a providential God, you will constantly live in fear. It's one of the problems that the church is facing now. That's the problems that we're facing now as a country. That's the problems we're facing now as a world. We don't believe or see that God's hand is in it. Or the church isn't going to step up and say it. So everything is plunged in this place of fear. But 2, without a providential God, this really is our mentality. It's a place of constant despair. You notice he says that all these things are against me. He's lost one son. He's already written the other son off as dead. And now the other brothers are doing what they can. We see kind of just an intense little standoff here. They're doing everything they can to kind of remove Benjamin from the grasp of the father. He says, all these things are against me. How many times have we been to that place? My week couldn't get any worse. My day couldn't get any worse. Look at all these things that keep piling up against me. All these things are against me. These things are going to crush me. These things are just too overwhelming. This is where Jacob is. What's interesting, because he does not see God working in his life. Really, when you think about it. Everything that has transpired in over 20 years. All of it. Every last ounce of it. Really boil it down. Every single thing has been for Jacob. It has been for Israel. Had Joseph not been sold into slavery, what would have happened to Jacob? We talk about the butler. We talk about Potiphar. We talk about Joseph kind of being incubated a little bit before he goes before Pharaoh. Joseph with his wisdom and the knowledge and the storing of all of the grain, preparing for the 7 years of famine. It's all readying to save Israel, bringing Israel from Canaan into Egypt for the next 400 years. All of these things are for Jacob. It's easy to see Jacob's place. Everything that's really happened to Jacob from a world view is terrible. Lost 2 sons, family is starving. If it's a famine and they're trying to buy grain, trying to buy food and buy supplies, it's not just for the family. It's also for the flocks, the herds, the servants. Jacob has a lot. You remember how many animals he sent to Esau when he was crossing over the river to go and meet his brother for the first time after X amount of years. From a world view, that would bring you to a place of despair. That's why we have to keep our eyes on the cross. That's why we have to keep our eyes on Jesus. We're not always going to see what he is doing. In all fairness-ish, we're going to use that term loosely, it would be hard for Joseph to really see past that level of despair. Probably not till many years later. But when you move through the last several chapters and into the ones we're going all the way through chapter 50, you see all of these hard things for the survival, the well-being, and the abundance and the fruitfulness of Israel. Then Reuben spoke to his father, saying, "Kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you." We see him trying to outplan and outmove God. But he said, "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone." Again, thanks, Dad. What's he saying? He's my son, Joseph's my son. The rest is a wash. When you are moving and living and walking without a providential God, you live a life of fear. You live a life of despair. You live a life of being jaded. It crushes your relationships. If any calamity should befall him along the way in which you go, then you would bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave. Kind of brings us back in a way. We've studied and read it a couple of times, but not boasting about tomorrow. We kind of see this in the opposite sense with Jacob. We've got one son trying to swindle one brother away from the father. We have the other father essentially planning for the days ahead. We saw the same thing in his dad, Isaac. Isaac planned on being dead long before he actually died. We don't know what tomorrow is. But the thing that should bring us a level of comfort, a great level of it, is truly recognizing who God is. We always look at the things that are against us. We like to try and look at the things that are for us. What are the things against us? Look at a practical level. Man, bills, debt, some relationships. How am I going to get out of that one? How am I going to pay this bill? So what do we look forward to? Payday. This is what's going to relieve my burden. It's always something tangible. It's always something seen. It's always something traded. It's always something gained. The problem is with all of those things, it's all something perishable. And the providence of God. If we were to quit looking at the concept of, well, all these things are against me, and look more at Romans 8:28. For all things work out for good. Book of Proverbs tells us that God will work all things out to its proper end. We're just trying to work all things out to its end. And we typically make a whole bunch of messes and start a bunch of little fires along the way. Trying to recognize, and this is the hard part for us, and I will give you that. Trying to recognize the providence of God in your life is impossible sometimes. I will give you that. That's why we walk by faith and not by sight. The last 7 years, at some point, one night we'll sit down and Megan and I will share our testimony and how we ended up here. But our road to here, to where we are right now, did not seem like providence. It was long, and it was brutal, and it was miserable. Dealing with people who we thought were friends. Dealing with situations that we thought were in our favor. The first 3 years while we were planting a church, we were trying to buy a house while we were living in the back of an office. It wasn't until really we got here, Megan and I sat down on the couch, was kind of looking at the calamity of our house. And it's like, man, how amazing is the hand of God. You let things pass through the hands of Jesus, you'd be surprised what happens. Which brings us back to a root point in Joseph. Waiting sometimes just a part of the walk. But you have to understand, while you can't see it, by faith, not by sight, while you can't see it, you have to understand that God is working all things out to its proper end. So we can move forward boldly and not stand still in fear. Let's pray together. Lord, thank you so much for your word. And thank you so much for the examples that you give to us in the word. Lord, we really do want to be like Joseph. We find ourselves more often like the brothers. We're very thankful that you have a heart like Joseph, and not a heart like ours. That you look at us with love and not with judgment. Lord, I pray for a strengthening, which is hard, God, because we know by your word how we develop that strength and endurance. And it's through being held under. But I pray, God, we wouldn't focus on the hard thing, causing us to forget the good. But Lord, we would wait for you, that we would watch for you, and Lord, that we would pursue you, casting aside the weights that do slow us down.